everyone, and welcome to another Workshop Wednesday. My name is Mike Stratton. I am a systems engineer here at Verify, and I'll be your host for today's workshop. Today, we are joined by Mr. Victor Verba. How's it going, Vic?
Well, when I'm not on mute, it's going well. Hey, how's it going, buddy?
Good,
Things are
good,
good,
man.
man. Things are good.
Uh, Vic is going to show everyone how to use the grouping option in the call reporting to identify different types of call events. So today, we will start off with a quick overview of our company and what we do. Then Victor will go over the call grouping in today's live demo. We'll pause some Q&A at the end of the demo and to get some of your questions answered. During the demo, if you have any questions, make sure to ask them in the Q&A panel in the bottom right corner of your screen. And then after Q&A, we will reward one lucky attendee a Amazon gift card. So hang around to see if you've won. Quick overview of Verify. So Verify is the preferred analytics and management solution for Cisco collaboration. We provide industry-leading CDR, UCCX, and Cube analytics, customizable dashboards and widgets, remote phone control, and change management. But today we're going to focus on call analytics. And last but not least, for those of you looking for a more hands-off Verify experience, we do offer a managed consulting service. Essentially, this is a service that provides a dedicated Verify SE, like myself or Vic, to do all the heavy lifting, giving you and your users a completely hands-off experience. Think of us as an extension of your organization. It provides upgrades, one-on-one training, report and dashboard building, or really anything you need. Your dedicated Verify systems engineer has you covered. The only thing you have to do is give us a call or send us an email. If you want any additional information on our ECS service, please feel free to reach out to your account manager, and we'd be happy to see if ECS is right for you. With all that said, I will pass the ball to Victor, and you can take it away.
Thank you, sir, and thank you guys for joining us for this weekly workshop. So, like Mike said, one of the things we're going to focus on today is going to be the data grouping section of Verify reporting. So let me go ahead and share out my screen here, and you should be coming up to the Verify history search page. So essentially, you guys have probably seen me in this page or any of the SEs over here. This is where you can come and just do some quick searches on general information, telephone numbers, calling party numbers, extensions, things like that. So I'm going to work out of this page a little bit today because this is going to be a great way of, whether you're looking in our report section or you're just building a report using the export option to just kind of see some of the things we can do. So the first thing I'm going to do is start off pretty simple. I'm going to go ahead and just do a very blanket search. We're going to really just look for all calls, and I'm going to kind of show you how the grouping section comes into play here. So I'm going to start off with a report that is basically just going to bring me back every call in my phone system. So I'm looking at the calling original or final called party number, and I'm just going to pop a capital X in this guy. Capital X's are wildcards in Verify, and I'm just going to do an ends with. So right now I'm looking at the previous week's worth of data, and this is going to bring back a lot of detail for us. We've got about 10,875 calls. I'm going to go ahead and click the export button here, and this is going to bring us into the report building page where we can, save this report for future use, give it a name, title, turn on some options, and things like that. So when I did this search, it brought back that 10,000 calls. Those are my search set statistics. And I could set some statistics on what I want to see out of those 10,000 calls. How many were abandoned, how many went to voicemail. Well, let me blow this guy back up here so you guys can see it. How many were abandoned, maybe how many went to voicemail, things like that. But what I'm bringing back here are statistics based on my search. My search is just a capital wildcard, so it's going to show me all of the calls in my system and give me some summary on that. Just for example, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the just show call history detail here because I don't need that. And I'm going to just show you what this brings back. This is very basic. It doesn't really drill into who's making these calls, placing these calls, receiving these calls, where they're going to, or anything like that. It's basically just giving me summary on what I requested. And there we have my 10,875 calls. 4% of them are abandoned, 2,000 of them went to voicemail. Those are just the basic statistics that we went ahead and added. So what I want to go ahead and show today, and what we're going to focus in on, is the additional summary or the grouping summary. So when I did my search, it brought back my calls, it brought back my statistics on my calls. where grouping summary comes in, it says, well, I want to see a little bit more than just a total summary of all those calls. Let's say, for example, I'm running an organization, and I want to see out of all of my calls, where are they going? What departments are handling those calls? How many are coming into those departments? How many are being abandoned? Which one of my departments or my device pools are handling the most calls? So for that, it's pretty straightforward. When you first come into this page, you're just going to enable data grouping. I like to consider data grouping a second layer of summary in your report. My first layer of summary is what I'm searching on. That's the all calls in this case. And then I set my statistics on what I want to see for all calls. But what grouping is going to allow me to do is choose additional levels of summary. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and show the originating, dialed, or terminating department. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the summary for all of those calls, those 10,000 calls, and we're going to group them based on all of the departments in my phone system. So this is a great, very easy to report to run to just see how departments are performing. You know, what calls or what departments are handling the most calls? How are they handling the most calls? So all I'm going to simply do is select my originating, dialed, or terminating department. And then I'm going to select how I want this to sort. If I sort it by the name, it's going to sort alphabetically. If I sort this by the highest count, it's going to show me the departments up at the top that have the most calls. And then what I'm going to get to do is select what I want to see from those departments. So very similar to how we set our search set statistics for our total call count, we get to set those same statistics from a department perspective because we're grouping or summarizing based on department also. So I'm going to throw a few things in here. So from a department perspective, I want to see how busy my departments are. So of course I want to see the total call count. I also want to see how many calls are originating at those particular departments. Maybe I want to see how many calls go to those departments. And then subsequently, how many get answered there. So what I'm doing here is just simply adding statistics that are important to me from a total volume perspective. Again, this is a pretty rudimentary report, but a great way to be able to get a grasp on how some of those calls and how some of those departments are performing when compared to one another. Other things that you may want to add are things like, you know, how many calls are being answered or the percent of calls being abandoned. Also, voicemail counts are also pretty important. So just kind of moving those up and scooting those around based on, you know, what's important to you. So we saw the report that I had run before. It basically just gave me a high-level summary of all my calls. Now I'm going to go ahead and run this guy, and we'll turn detail off for right now. Yeah, I don't want to see 10,000 calls. So we'll turn detail off for this particular report, and we could look at some detail in a second when we get to our second call and some of the advantages of being able to group. So now what we're looking at is that same search. So I still have these summary values, which is the total summary for my department, but also what I've got is a total summary broken down by each individual department. You can see I have my rentals group taking 2,612 calls. 1,000 of those originated from my rentals group. In other words, they placed 1,000 calls. 370 of them, one of them may have gone to my rentals department where it didn't get answered, or it overflowed, or it rolled to a different department or a voicemail. And 1,600 of those went and were answered at my rentals group. And then again, here's the additional statistics that we have. Or that we requested. Now, the nice thing about this is a great high-level overview of how those departments are performing. And you'll notice we have these no associated departments right here. This is pretty common. This is something that you would expect to see. What does that mean? Well, that just means that these calls are going to a department or a directory number or a port number or a route point where there is no department associated to them. If a call goes into voicemail, voicemail doesn't have a department. It's just voicemail. So you're going to have calls going to entities or different devices within your organization that may not have departments, and that's absolutely okay. If we turn on detail, we would be able to see what some of these calls are. I'm going to venture to say vast majority of them are going into voicemail, or they're hitting route points or different entities that are not end user or department related. Now, the reason I see so many of these with such a high volume is because I did a very general search. I just said, bring me back everything. Not everything goes to a department. It may go to a route point that goes to an auto attendant. Well, there's no department involved in that call, but that's going to be part of my total count here. So that's one of the reasons you see those. A lot of times that can be confusing, especially when we're talking about end users and supervisors who just aren't familiar with the inner workings of Call Manager and what route points are and things like that. So this is not a field that you have to have in there. If we don't want to see those unassociated users, we don't have to have that in there. If I go to my grouping, you have right here an option to include, or if I turn it off, exclude grouping for unassociated users. And now what's going to happen is it's going to go ahead and exclude those 4,000 calls from the grouping. They'll still be part of my main search set. You'll see that my total count has not gone down, but what you'll see is I no longer see those unassociated calls in my grouping statistics here. So this is a great high-level overview of what you can do with grouping. And it doesn't have to just be done for entire departments. This could be done on end users, device pools, termination codes, which we'll get into in a minute. So the next thing we're going to go ahead and take a look at is a little bit deeper look into how grouping can help. This was a very blanket report, and this is a really great high-level report to show kind of how your departments are handling your calls, which ones are handling the most, and even ones that have common total counts or are receiving the same amount of counts. How are they doing from an answer, abandon, and voicemail percentage? Are they trending about the same, or do you have one department that handles just about the same amount of calls as another one that is doing better from an answer percentage or worse from an abandon percentage? The next thing I'm going to go ahead and take a look at is how we can use grouping for something that we get quite commonly, and that's people wanting to see how their support departments are doing, or how are we doing from a first call resolution? Do I have customers calling back over a period of a day or an hour or a week? So we're going to build a quick what I call a first call resolution report. So for that, we're really going to isolate inbound calls. We want to see all the calls going to a particular part of my organization. Let's just find a department that we're going to pick on here. We'll go ahead and go owner services. We're going to take a look at our owner services department. And we're going to see all the calls coming into that department, and then how many of those telephone numbers may have had to call us multiple times, perhaps because they didn't get the right answer the first time. So for this, it's pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is we're going to add some additional searching here. So we want to isolate our inbound calls. This is a service department, so we really just want to see all the calls coming in. If you've worked with Verify, there's more than a couple different ways to be able to do that. One, I can add a calling party. I know my DNs or my extensions in my organization are only 4 digits. So if I did something like ends with 10 X's, that's really, for me, going to encompass all of my inbound calls. Alternatively, we can focus in on devices, and in this case, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and run a report based on our SIP gateway. So essentially, what this is going to do for us, all of our inbound calls are going to go over our SIP gateway. If I click View Previous Week right now, this is essentially going to bring back all inbound calls to my entire organization. But I don't want that. I don't want all calls to my organization. I want to be able to hone in on that owner services and how many calls are going to that owner services. So let's do that next. So this is going to be a departmental-based report, so I'm just going to come to my search criteria, and I want to see all the calls going to a particular department that are actually being handled there. I'm not necessarily looking to see if a call came into voicemail and then called back. I want to see calls that actually may be connected to somebody in our owner services department. So for that, I'm going to focus in on the terminating department. All right, and we're going to go ahead and type in, well, I think we said owner services. There we go. So now what we're doing is we're isolating 2 things. One, I'm isolating my inbound calls, and I'm isolating all calls that went to my owner services. Now, if you're familiar with call data at all, you know that calls can do lots of different things. They could bounce around. They could be transferred to different departments and things like that. We're not going to focus too much on that. We're going to see some of that when we look at our dropped calls. But we're just going to take a quick look at all calls coming into my owner services group. All right, we're going to let that guy go ahead and focus, and now I can see I've got 156 calls coming in from my outside world and going to my owner services department, and then I've got some additional statistics here. Now, one of the reasons that I talked a little bit about that termination reason, calls can do different things. They could come in departments, they can bounce around, they could get transferred to different departments. So these codes can be very, very important to you. This code in particular is probably one of the most important for what we're trying to do here. This code, this normal call clearing code indicates that that is the end of the call. And a great way to be able to kind of get a one-to-one relationship, that this is a call that came into my owner services, but also ended at my owner services. Now, if I want to see if this person called into owner services again, it's going to be somewhat important for me to hone in on this, because I don't want to necessarily count a call twice. Let's say it went to owner services, they transferred it to a different department, and then they transferred it back to owner services. In your phone system, that could technically be 2 calls to owner services, and it kind of is, because it went to owner services twice. But what most people are looking for from a first call resolution is they really just want to see that presented as 1 call to owner services, because that's really 1 caller calling in. That's their one experience. And when we talk about first call resolution, that's that 1 caller calling in. That's their first call. I want to see if they disconnected, hung up, and then had to call back in later on in the day, or they had to call back several times throughout the week. So using this termination code, we're going to isolate all of these calls down to 1 single call to owner services. And we're going to do that by simply adding that cause code of the originating or terminating cause code equals normal call clearing. And again, the reason we're doing that is because we don't really want to count transfers twice. We just want to see that 1 particular call that ended at owner services, and if these people had to call back. So I'm going to run my view results real quick. And really what we've been focusing on primarily here has been how we fine-tune that data to get to owner services, just isolate those inbound calls, but really only count those calls once if they went to owner services, not if they had to get transferred to multiple people in owner services or anything like that. So now that we have all of our data, we've got our search criteria in here, we're going to export those results, and we're going to take a little bit of a look at the grouping. So in our first report, we grouped off of the department. If I group off of the department right now, it's going to show me the owner services department. That's not necessarily what I want. I want to see the people calling in, and I want to see if they had to call in more than once. So for that, the calling party is always the person that originated the call. If I cancel out of here and we look at our detail, these are the caller IDs of the people calling in. I want to see if these people had to call in more than 1 time. So for us, we're going to take everything that we searched for, and then we're going to go ahead and summarize or group based off of this calling party number. That's going to isolate all of the telephone numbers or the caller ID of the folks calling in. So we're just going to go to our grouping statistics here. And if this guy's off, you're just going to go ahead and toggle it back on. And rather than searching for a department entity, we need to search for that calling party number, because that is the caller ID of the person calling in from the outside world. How do we know that? Because we are isolating the calls from the outside world by saying, hey, only show us calls coming into our SIP gateway. So now that we've isolated our calling party number, if I run this report right now, we're going to see all calls. And you know what? We'll go ahead and do it just to kind of give you a little idea of what we're looking at here. I'm going to remove some of these counts because I really don't need them. I'm not looking at those departments. I know all these calls are coming into my owner services. And you know, we don't have a whole ton of data here, so I'm going to turn some detail on for us as well. So let's look at this report. Let's see what we've got right now. And this is without making any additional changes. This is really just setting our search set and saying, hey, we're going to group on that calling party number. What we're going to see are all of our calls. And let me blow this guy up so everybody can see it. There's our 148 calls, and we can see how many times these telephone numbers called in. But you'll also notice that, you know, a lot of these folks called in once. This doesn't help me from a first call resolution. I don't want to have to go through all of these phone numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to use grouping to show only people that have called in more than once. So if I go back to my report, I simply click Export Results. Not going to make any additional changes in the search set. That's perfect. It's capturing all the calls coming into my department. It's also showing me all the telephone numbers that have called in. I'm sorting them by the highest to lowest. But this guy right here is going to help us identify just the folks that called in more than once. So minimum primary grouping count. Right now, by default, it's set to 0, which means that I'm going to show all of the telephone numbers that have called in at least once. But if I change this to 2, now I'm only going to be able to see calls that called in more than once. And if we go ahead and give this guy a run, you're going to see that we've whittled our list down a little bit to just show the callers that have called in more than once. Now, I'm looking at a previous week. You may want to look at a previous week. You may just want to look at a current day. This may be something that you want on a dashboard. So it's constantly refreshing for the current day, so that way you can see, hey, I can see this telephone number called us 3 times today. Let's go ahead and run a report, see who they're talking to. Maybe try to figure out why they had to call in so many times. But now what we're looking at is very simply a report that we created isolating all inbound calls by using our SIP gateway. Isolating all calls that are going to our owner services group, and using this normal call clearing code to isolate the calls that have also ended in that owner services group. So what we see here are these particular phone numbers called in 5 times, 2 times, but what we've done is we've gone from this excessive list with all these people that just called in once to being able to isolate just the calls that callers that have called in multiple times. Now, there's a lot of other things that you can do in grouping. Let's say, for example, hey, we want to see when these callers are calling in. Did they call in multiple times in one day? Did they call in several times throughout the day? So those are all options that you can toggle on within the data grouping as well. So if I export this and I go back to my data grouping configurations, you'll notice that if I scroll down a little bit, we have the same type of statistics here that we have in our search set. And that's the ability to show some charts or some graphs to find out maybe when these telephone numbers have called in. Now, I'm looking at this report from a previous week. I may not necessarily want to see hour a day, or maybe I do on an hour a day basis. I'll leave that on there, and I'm also going to go ahead and turn on day of week. What this is going to do is it's going to go ahead and give me a graph for each one of the groupings. In other words, each one of those calling party numbers, and show me exactly when they called in. Was it multiple times in 1 hour? Was it multiple times in one day of the week? Or was it multiple times throughout the week that these end users called in? So these are just different toggles that you can kind of turn on and play with to try to get some of the statistics that you're looking for on a daily, weekly, or hourly type basis. I'll blow this guy back up for us here. And here we're looking at, we have that same grouping, we have our same statistics, and now what I can see is this particular telephone number, and I just kept total calls in there. I could see that they called in at 10 a.m. I could see they called in at 1 a.m., 2 p.m., and 3 o'clock. I can also see from, if I scroll down, I added the day of week values in there as well. And each one of these graphs is a different phone number because we told it to group off the phone numbers. But if I scroll down through here, I'm also going to be able to see that day of week statistic. So we asked, when did this person call in? Was it all the same time? Was it all the same day? Well, now we can see that this person called in Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and they called in twice on Friday. So this is a great kind of first call resolution, and you don't have to have all of this detail. If the graphs aren't super important for you, if this is a daily report, I probably don't need a day of week graph in here because it's all one day. But if it's a weekly report or a monthly report, you may want to see, is this multiple calls throughout the day or multiple calls throughout the week, or did this just all happen on one day? This is a great way to be able to get that information, or look at it from a high level and just see if it's occurring and how often it's occurring. And if we want to see the detail of where those calls went, we could just simply click on the number and see, I could see what extensions they're going to, who's answering those calls, how long they spoke on each one of those calls. Right. The next one I'm going to go ahead and take a look at is something that we had a request from one of our customers, and very similar on those lines, but this was a group of sales and collections. It was part of a larger company who also does collections. There are a lot of laws behind being able to contact customers for collections or end users. So what they were looking at is to try to find out if we're coming close to breaching our contracts or our laws within our state that say we can only call customers a certain amount of times. So this is looking less from a first call resolution and more looking from an outbound perspective. Really what we're going to do is just kind of flip the board a little bit. Here we were looking at all calls coming in. From going to our owner services, we're going to change that up and we're going to look at all calls going out of our owner services, and then we're going to go ahead and summarize based off the final called party number to see how many times those calls went to individuals. So when we're talking about compliance and we're talking about legal, it's important to know that, hey, if we can only call customers 10 times in one day, that we're not breaching that threshold because that becomes a legal problem. So we're going to isolate this the same way that we isolated our first call resolution, but instead of looking at calls coming in, we're going to look at calls going out. And for that, I'm going to use that terminating device name, and we're going to focus in again on that SIP trunk. If I run this right now, we're looking at all outbound calls. Of course, we don't want all outbound calls. We want to be able to see outbound calls from a particular department in this case. So I'm going to look at any calls that originated at and we'll pick on owner services. Let's see if we've got a sales group. Well, let's pick on a sales group. We want to make sure that our sales group is not overcalling some of our customers. So what we've done is we've isolated all outbound calls to our sales group. And again, we want to count those calls just once. We don't want to count multiple transfers and things like that. So we're going to use those cause codes to isolate just the one individual leg of the call. And I'm going to use that normal call clearing. Again, that's important to help isolate just the one call from Corona Sales that got out to an end user or connected to an end user's phone, or in this case, maybe an external customer's phone. So let's view those results right here. That's going to bring up the detail of all of those results. And now we can see they placed 49 outbound calls. Once I export this, again, I'm in the report building screen, and I'm going to pop right over to my grouping. Now, originally, we were grouping on the calling party number. Calling party always initiates the call. We don't care who initiated the call for this report. We just want to make sure that our customers are not getting overcalled. So we want to focus in on the numbers that are being called. And in this case, that's going to be the final called party number, because that is the number that the call went to. We're going to continue to sort on that highest lowest. And I don't know how many calls we have here, but we can adjust our minimum primary grouping count. Like if I want to say maybe our laws are we can't call a customer more than 5 times. I'm going to go ahead and put 5 in here, and we're going to go ahead and run this. Now, keep in mind that this could be a daily report. This could be a dashboard or a widget. So I don't have a ton of data for today, but if this were a report or a dashboard that's refreshing, I could see if we've called this customer 5 times. And if 5 times is our legal limit for a single day, well, then I know that we've hit that limit. And if this goes to 6, I know I have to go ahead and talk to somebody in our sales group to make sure that they're not overcalling our customers. So let's give this guy a run. We're looking at our final called party number. We want to make sure that any number was called only appears in here if it was called at least 5 times. There we go. And we can see that we've got several phone numbers right here that were called 8 times, and these guys were called 5 times. Now, if our legal limit is 5, I know we're okay over here. We want to make sure we don't call these numbers again. But if it is 5, we know that we have a legal problem. Somehow, the numbers are not getting through to our sales department on how often they've been called. And this is, again, from a legalis purpose, a great way to make sure that you're not overcalling your customers and setting yourself up for a lawsuit. Last but not least, there are some additional things that you can do in the data grouping. And I know we are almost out of time, so I'm just going to go back to something, just a very general report, and I'm going to show you a little bit from a data grouping. And I kind of showed you a little bit already, and that was the ability to exclude certain things. So this particular report, again, I'm just doing a very blanket search. We're looking at all outbound calls, and I'm going to change my grouping to show just those terminating departments. Within data grouping, you have the ability to create grouping search sets. So in this particular case, I'm looking at all of my outbound calls. I'm no longer filtering on any particular department, and I can see I have 681 calls. All right. Now, you'll notice I grouped that wrong because I'm looking at my outbound calls, yet I grouped on my terminating department where I wanted to group on my originating department. In other words, who's making those outbound calls? Let me go ahead and change that here. And now we're going to see a list of all of our departments. So within data grouping, I have the ability to create searches on top of searches, we'll say. So let's say, for example, I'm looking at all of my outbound calls. I have 681 of them. I can see all of my departments in here that are placing those outbound calls. But let's say there's particular departments that I don't really want to see in here. I want their total calls because it's still important that I see all total calls. But I don't really need to see these guys. I know they make an abundance of calls. I just want to focus in on some of these other calls. Well, you can add data grouping, so you'll still get your summary of the 681 calls, but you're essentially going to hide the departments that you don't want to see. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and exclude a couple departments. and we're going to exclude some originating departments or originating departments because I'm focusing on calls going out. And let's say, for example, I don't want to see rentals in here. So this is not going to skew my total summary. My total summary is still going to be 800. I did is. So actually, this is a pretty good example as well. Instead of doing is not a department, I did is. So now what you see is I still have my 681 calls. Out of those 681 calls, I'm only showing my rentals department, so I could see 233 calls. So what I've done by doing data grouping or search set grouping is I've taken my total volume and I said, you know what, out of my total volume, just show me this particular subset for rentals. So there's a lot of flexibility with being able to include certain things, but also being able to exclude certain things. So let's say, for example, there were certain cause codes I didn't want to see. And this is a pretty common dashboard or widget where I said, hey, I only want to see cause codes that are not normal, or which ones may have terminated improperly. I could change that to an is not, and then see all of the calls that did not have a normal call clearing or were part of a transfer per se. So there's a lot of different flexibility, and in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and kick the ball back to Mike because I know I am running over. But I'm hoping that I was able to shed a little bit of light on how you can leverage some of that data grouping to get even more finite statistics out of your total summary values. Mike, any questions for us?
Unmuted too. Yeah, there's one question from Mark. Mark asked this question when you were doing the first call resolution report. He asked, if you have multiple cube routers that can receive a call, can you include more than one router as the calling source?
Yes. So each of your cube routers should have a unique device. In my case, I just had the one, but I would expect that each of your cube routers should have a different device. And if they don't have a different device name, you could also sort that based off of the IP address. Those would all be coming or going to an IP address that will be different. Each of the cube routers would have a unique IP address or range. So yeah, there's multiple ways to be able to kind of get that based on which particular cube router it's going to or from.
Excellent. And that is it for the Q&A.
All right. Go ahead and stop sharing my screen and kick the ball back over to you, sir.
I do, before we wrap up here, I do want to remind everyone about Planet Verify. It's our online community where you can connect with us and other Verify users and expand your knowledge of all things Verify. Hop on over to planet.verify.com or planet.com/planet and take a look around. And we just announced our upcoming event called Verify Beyond. For those of you who hung out with us in the block party, was it last summer? This should be kind of familiar. October 27th will be the event. If you're one of the first to register for our upcoming live stream event, the first 100 registered attendees will get an awesome T-shirt. We'll cover new things like upcoming enhancements like Zoom phone, WebEx calling. We'll talk about the roadmap for future releases and much more. So go ahead, go to verify.com/beyond to register. And then the moment that we've all been waiting for, the winner of our $50 Amazon gift card is Lee Watkins. Congratulations, Lee. Your account manager will be reaching out to you shortly. And then don't forget to join us next week where Brian and Dre will demonstrate some troubleshooting tips for remote phone controls and phone macros. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks all.